Good morning and welcome to the Point. On Tuesday, many of us will head to the polls to make choices in the primary election. The election serves to pick nominees from the Democratic and Republican Party that will then compete in the November election. In the last several weeks, we've looked at the contested primaries for the 3rd and 6th congressional districts, as well as the 73rd state House seat. This morning, the 60th and 61st House primaries. Both districts are in Kalamazoo County. In the 60th, current Representative John Hoadley is term limited and could not run again. Instead, he's running for the Democratic nomination in the 6th congressional district. Two Democrats are trying to become the Democratic nominee for the state House. Both are from Kalamazoo and both are Kalamazoo County Commissioners, Stephanie Moore and Julie Rogers. We start with our conversation with Commissioner Moore. Tell me about your background. Obviously, you have been elected to public office and are currently serving. Tell me kind of what your professional career has been.
Absolutely. I am a community organizer by trade. So for the last 24 years, working grassroots, doing nonpartisan civic engagement, doing faith-based organizing. And really, I do a lot of consulting work. I do work for a nonprofit organization around community engagement events, around health, education, economics, and also I have served as a city commissioner, a county commissioner, and I also serve as the chair of the Community Services Charity Board for the 60th District State House Representative's Office.
Well, obviously, you've got a lot of public service background, but I still ask everybody why they choose to run for this office and why do they choose to run now. It's an interesting time. Not only is there so much going on in the world, but campaigning is different because of the pandemic. You can't do door to door. So this is kind of a different animal.
Absolutely. So I think the time is now for leadership that has some lived experiences, that understands the times that we are in now, culture, what we're talking about in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, not just in representation and staff, but also in policy and budgeting. If we really want to stabilize our economy, if we want to create safe, beautiful neighborhoods all across our county and the state, then we have to bring the voices to the table in the room that understands that you have to connect the dots on how you deliver the services, how the services are funded, and the policy that drives those services. And I definitely have that expanded view and expertise. And so definitely, I believe that the time is now for someone with experience, relationships within the community, with agencies, organizations, and the overall community to be at the table and help other state legislatures push this through for our great state of Michigan.
One of the things you said that interested me there is the policy that drives the services. What does that look like from your standpoint? Because sometimes in Lansing, that can be a little murky.
Oh, absolutely. So we want to talk about, for example, economics. We want to make sure that there are policies that are working for small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women business, local businesses, that they have the capacity to be bankable, that we're looking at financial institutions that are welcoming and accepting to these individuals who want to sustain businesses so that they can pass on generational wealth. And we want to make sure that they have relationships so that they can sustain these businesses. When we talk about health services and health deliveries, it's the policies that determine if people have health care access, and that really relates to the healthcare services. So when we look at the things that are happening in our community, where some of the most vulnerable people are impacted, we have to look at it from a policy perspective. Look at it from the top instead of just dealing with, the symptomatic things at the bottom. And so that's the perspective I want to bring to Lansing, being able to connect those dots and make sure that we are inclusive of the needs and the issues that our business owners, our homeowners, that our folks that are looking to advance their careers, that they need to sustain themselves and their families.
What are some of the, obviously these are very important core issues for you. Are there any individual issues specific to Kalamazoo that you really want to work on? Obviously, everything you've just talked about is germane, but are there any things going on in your community that you want to address?
So absolutely, all of Kalamazoo, particularly the 60th district, is my community. The environment is major for me. We've had some issues that from Flint to the Kalamazoo River, where our water system has been impacted. We need to do everything that we can to make sure that we have adequate testing ongoing and that is consistent region-wide so that we're not just reacting to situations when our water supply is impacted, but we're monitoring that to make sure that our residents are safe and always have access to clean water, clean air, and the environment. And that takes policy, fully funded policy, to make sure that those tools and resources are available in our region. I also think that we need to make sure health and health access is addressed. Because when you have a healthy workforce, when you have a healthy teachers and students going through education, that stabilizes our economy. It gives some sense of security to our communities. And when the neighborhoods are doing good, downtown is going to thrive. When downtown is thriving, our region is expanding. And that's what Michigan needs. We need to make sure that we are sound, we're welcoming, we're diverse and inclusive, but more importantly, we're taking care of everybody across the spectrum in terms of what they need to be the best citizens that they can.
Commissioner Julie Rogers is also running for the open seat. Here is our discussion.
We'll start with the very basics. Let's talk about your background, what you've done up to now, and then we'll move on into this race and why you got involved. So tell me what you've been doing up to now.
Sure, Rick. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a little while. I first was with you back in 2008 when I ran for the State House in the 61st. It was a heartbreaker, 49%, real close. And it just goes to show you why this independent redistricting commission is so important, because I was one of those victims of gerrymandering. So I'm now in the 60th, and for the past 8 years, I've served as a Kalamazoo County Commissioner in District 5, and I've really enjoyed my time working in local government. I also am a physical therapist with a local hospital, and that's really what got me started in working in government. I had a number of physical therapy patients that could not afford their prescription drug medications. And I had a couple of people I ended up sending to the emergency room with very high blood pressures, critically high blood pressures. And I started investigating why this is. Why do people have to decide between putting food on the table and their health care? And as I got involved in National Association of Counties on their Health Policy Steering Committee, I discovered there was a prescription drug discount card that counties were eligible for. And so I worked with my colleagues across the aisle in a bipartisan way to bring that prescription drug discount card forward. Why I'm running for this spot in Lansing, I think State Representative John Hoadley has served our county well. He is moving on because of term limits, and it's an open seat. And I would like to try to help more people on a bigger stage at the state level.
You mentioned some very specific reasons. We know that in the state of Michigan, that the conversation around healthcare has been an ongoing one. Certainly, Representative Hoadley has been talking about that in Lansing. What do you think you can do with that kind of background and your experience already working through government to try to make people have better access, as you were pointing out, to prescription drugs? How can you transfer that to the state level and perhaps get a broader program?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Well, as you can imagine, when you are elected, you're instantly expected to be an expert in hundreds of different topics. And there, frankly, are not very many people in government with healthcare background and healthcare knowledge. I think I bring a unique lens, a unique set of experiences to Lansing, as I have to county government, just with that different understanding and background. One of the things I also think that needs work is mental health parity. And so we've been very focused on physical health, but at the state level, we are seeing record cuts to mental health. And really, as Senator Stabenow likes to say, we shouldn't treat healthcare above the neck any different than we treat healthcare below the neck. And so mental health parity is another thing I would champion. We've had a strong connection in our county jail with our local mental health partners. And Kalamazoo County, unlike some surrounding counties, we've had 2 mental health workers assigned to our jail for a number of years. I fear that with these proposed cuts in Lansing, that could go away. And so jail is no place for people with mental illness. And I think that's one of my other priorities is criminal justice reform. I appreciate the governor's task force, and I think we need to look at those recommendations that task force came forward with.
You've mentioned some budget cuts, and we know that this pandemic and the subsequent loss of tax dollars into the state is going to create some real belt tightening in some areas, even if the federal government comes through, as some expect them to do. You've got experience on the county level. How do you grapple with a budget like that, particularly when I think at the state level, it would be fair to say there's a considerable more push and shove when it comes to budgets?
Sure. Well, in leadership, I really worked hard to protect our county employees' jobs. And so that was the last resort for cutting. As you may have heard, we had to make about a $1 million cut mid-year at our county budget out of $100 million because of COVID and the various expenses. And it wasn't really so much expenses in Kalamazoo County as it was a revenue issue. As you can imagine, for 3 months, many of our buildings were closed and we weren't taking in the same revenue that we usually did. And so we had to make some difficult choices. As a leader, one of the things I put forward were the laundry list of items that the county commissioners put forward at the end of the budget cycle last year. I felt that it was important to show that we had skin in the game as leaders. And so about $250,000 of the $1 million cut were different projects and initiatives that the county commissioners had put forward. And while they were important, they weren't deemed as essential services.
Rogers went on to say that she's concerned about education funding at the state level, and to be sure, there will be a lot of pressure on budgeting for the 2021 fiscal year. Look for a new budget sometime in September, after another revenue estimating conference later this month. I should point out the winner in the Democratic primary will face Republican Gary Mitchell in November. When we come back, a look at the other state house seat in Kalamazoo County, also open due to term limits, and this time it's a Republican primary that we will preview. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. All 110 seats in the state house are up for a vote next week, and at least 2 cases in West Michigan, their open seats exist because of term limits. Both Kalamazoo County House districts are impacted by that. Brant Iden is a Republican who has represented the 61st District for the past 6 years. He cannot run for another term, and 2 fellow Republicans are running to replace him as their party's nominee, Tom Graham and Bronwyn Holtum. First, our discussion with Tom Graham. Start, if you would, by telling me about your background, about what you've been doing in your professional life, and then we'll move on to the politics part of this.
Well, started out a long time ago as a paper boy, owned my own business, bought my own computer, taught myself how to program. By the time I was 16, I was in the court administration programming business. I was working for the Battle Creek Friend of the Court. Since then, I've been a contractor, consultant, employee, computer programmer, analyst, and for the last 12 years, I've been the IT systems development manager at a hazardous waste disposal firm.
Well, given that background, what leads you to this? Because obviously that's a lot of life experience. Running for office is a big leap. What convinced you that this was the office and this was the time?
Well, I've seen a lot of division lately. The world seems to have become a divisive place. I've always been a moderate. I've always been able to see both sides of the story. I grew up in a Democrat household. My father worked for General Motors, and I just feel like I'm a good fit. When I've been programming for the last 37 years, I've dealt with a lot of regulated companies. I've worked for pharmaceuticals. I've worked for medical device manufacturers, hazardous waste disposal. Doing this, you have to learn quite a few of the regulations. And I just started loving reading law, and I just started doing that in my spare time. So I'm very good at reading law, finding bugs in the law, just like finding bugs in millions of lines of code that I debug every day. So my experience with organizing, listening to users, organizing their thoughts into cohesive structures and cohesive projects, and being able to listen with an open mind, actually implement what people are telling me while working with accounting and manufacturing and inventory and regulations and all of the other stuff. That's just the way I think, and that's what I think we need in Congress right now. I think that's the good way to think in Congress.
When you look at the district that you hope to represent, and when you overlay that with your experience, what are the things that need to be done other than what you're talking about is critical thinking? What do you think needs to be done? What issues are you interested in working on should you make it to Lansing?
The biggest one is I want more focus on CTE, career technical education. I think there's a lot of people who are college bound, but there's also a lot of people who aren't college bound. And in many, many cases, when a non-college bound person leaves high school, that's the end of our investment in them. We need to continue investing in them outside of high school, even though they're not college bound. There are career technical education, vocational education programs to help these people. These are talented people. They just need that skill developed. I believe that state money should be spent on degrees that support careers. There's a lot of state money being paid to careers that don't support jobs, and right now we need to support jobs. Other things that I'd like to get into is I've got some criminal justice reform legislation, working on that right now. HIDA and automatic expungement. These are great programs, but the sad reality is in the internet age, the internet trumps them because the people's arrest records are online. You can look up anybody's arrest record today, and if a company, even though your record has been expunged or the case has been dismissed through HIDA, if a potential employer looks that up, they're going to see your mugshot online.
Mr. Graham believes efforts should be made to remove those names from online content. The other candidate in this primary is Bronwyn Haltom. If you would, start by telling me a little bit about your background, which is pretty extensive in politics, and you've been at this in a number of different places. So give me an idea of where you've been and what you've done.
Yes, Rick, thank you so much for having me on this morning. My name is Bronwyn Haltom. I grew up in Oshtemo, just down the road. I was educated here, and then I went to Kalamazoo Valley Community College. Ended up graduating from the University of Michigan. Now my husband and I have a small communications and marketing business, and we live here in Texas Corner. So I've been a part of this community for a long time. I love this community, and I would be so honored to serve in Lansing.
What made you decide to get into this race? I always ask the same question. Why this office and why now?
Yeah, it goes back to my biography. I grew up here. I love this community, and I think we need to focus on the things that matter to people here. I've talked to thousands and thousands of voters over the last year and a half of being in this race. People care about jobs and they care about education, especially now, and I want to be a representative that's accessible and focuses on these core issues that really matter to our district.
And what are some of those things that are important? What are some of the things that need to be done for that area of Kalamazoo County?
Right. Like I said, I've been talking to thousands of voters, and I hear from concerned parents. We have very good public schools here. We're in Mattawan. We're just down the road from the Portage school districts. People like these schools, and we need to make sure that the funding continues, that we focus on class sizes, and then making sure that students are prepared when they graduate high school. Too many students, when they graduate, they're not ready to go to college or enter the workforce in a meaningful way. We need to make sure that our students are prepared for the jobs of tomorrow.
You talked a little bit about funding, and budgeting in the state of Michigan is going to be interesting going forward. Now, if you're successful and end up in Lansing in January, the budget for 2021 will already be done, but as we talk today, it is not, and it is going to be a struggle, especially if you consider the amount of shortfall that the state has seen and the uncertainty of what the federal government might do. That may not just be a next year thing either. I mean, that may be a continuing thing depending on how the economy redevelops. What's your approach to budgeting, understanding that at the state level, everything has to be balanced?
Yes, that's a very good point. And this isn't going to be easy. And I'm very honest with constituents when I'm speaking with them. It's going to be a really tough conversation. It's always easier when you have budget surpluses. But where I start is education. That's something I'm not willing to compromise on. So we've got to focus on that first. We figure out how are we going to pay to keep giving our kids a quality education? Because if we don't ensure that Michigan delivers quality public education to our students, we can't move forward. We can't keep investing, and we're going to end up losing a lot of potential. We're going to lose students to other states, and we're going to end up paying for that for decades to come. So that's my number one priority. There are going to be tough cuts, but I'm unwilling to compromise on that fundamental great equalizer of education.
One of the things that we continue to talk about as we move through this pandemic is what it looks like, our economy looks like going forward, of course. But it's not just about the state's economy, it's about individuals' economy. What is the role of the state as we emerge from this, and we're not there yet, but as we start to emerge from this, in helping businesses, particularly small businesses, and those who will struggle to recover?
Yeah, we've seen that initially. We had the emergency PPP come out, and I think that was really helpful to a lot of businesses here in our community. I've talked to dozens and dozens of business owners where that was the immediate lifeline. Well, now we're a little bit past that. So one thing we need a lot more of from the state is clarity. What can you do? What are the restrictions there? Business owners, that uncertainty is really, really harmful. So we need to make sure that at the state level, we're providing clarity. We do need to continue helping our businesses, especially when they're disadvantaged because of government action. Initially, we saw a lot of small business owners being hurt unnecessarily at the expense of the big boxes. Initially, we had local stores that sold the very same products as a Target or a Walmart that were being shut down. So we need to make sure that we have equality across the board and then clarity as well.
The winner of this primary will face Christine Morris, the lone Democrat on the ballot in the 61st District. The primary election is set for this coming Tuesday, and you can see your ballot as well as get details on in-person voting and your polling location by going to woodtv.com and following the link. For many of you, the election is already over, at least from a voting perspective, because according to the Secretary of State, a record number of you have voted by absentee ballot. What will that mean for election night coverage, and when will we have final results? A note about that next. To the point. Because so many people have voted absentee, and because those votes can't be counted until Election Day, it will be interesting to see what, if any, impact that has on getting election results. Some election officials suggest there could be delays, while others expect the process to work in a normal fashion, having final results on Tuesday night. In any event, we'll be tracking those House races we featured this morning and others around West Michigan. Again, if you haven't voted or have questions about how and where to vote in person on Tuesday, you can go to our website at woodtv.com. Cast your vote, then join us at 10 and 11 Tuesday night for the results as we get ready for the general election in November. And of course, join me here each week between now and then as we talk about all of the races from the White House to the State House at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning for To the Point.